What's good, everybody? I'm Keandre. This is HoopIntellect, and welcome back to the channel. And it's that time of year again. We've got March Madness right around the corner. The conference tournaments are getting into full swing, and that means we've got another board update before we get into everything all the way. That also means the scouting reports are coming out very soon in these next several days, so definitely stay locked to the channel for that as well. But I like where we're at on this one. I'm working on defining those tiers a little bit more to put them out on the next one, and then there's obviously going to be some draft decisions that shape how that's going to look in these next several weeks too. But yeah, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's go ahead and get into it. Cooper Flagg has continued his ascent as one of the best freshmen that I've seen, and objectively one of the best ever. He's been great across the board, but he's truly exceeded every expectation that anyone had of him as a creator at 17-18. He's continued to grow as a shot maker, as a driver, and as a passer every game, and though he's still got some room to grow in that aspect, he's definitely changed my outlook on just how good he can be offensively. And for the stat fans, he currently has the third highest BPM for a freshman since 2008, trailing just Anthony Davis and Zion, who were absolute legends in their seasons, and he's got the sixth highest for all classes. We're about to see Flagg's competitiveness reach its peak in winning time, so while we probably don't learn much else for him the rest of the way, it'll be fun to see just how far he can lead this team and how he ends his story at Duke, because he won't be there next year. Dylan Harper remains number 2 on the board, and despite Rutgers having a bit of a disappointing year, he's proven his worth as one of the top prospects in the class. You look at how he led them to wins against Washington and USC, and see all the pieces as a 6'6" guard who can drive it, make plays, and has been much more active defensively, and can see multiple paths to NBA success. Now, even though they didn't get to where they wanted to, the experience of carrying this team, battling in close games, and working through being schemed against was positive for both he and Ace, I think, and while he's still got things to work on, he's pretty easily the guy I'm most confident in behind Cooper Flagg. VJ Edgecombe has been a bit streaky from 3 as of late, but that hasn't kept him from showing that all-around impact that he can have on a game otherwise. He's an incredible athlete who's grown a ton as a ball handler and driver over the year. He plays well without the ball, he's a good passer, and makes plays defensively. Now, he'll need to continue working as a finisher and just advancing his offensive skill set, but he's someone I'm pretty confident contributes at a high level in the league in the areas that matter, and he has upside I think is worth being patient with in the top 5. Ace Bailey has quietly struggled a bit to end the year, averaging just 11, 5, and 2 on 41% from the floor in his last 8 games, and generally he's had some really cold stretches from deep. Big picture though, I don't think much has changed with him. I think the expectations have been a little high, but a 6'9" wing with legitimate shot making chops and the potential to be a plus defender with better structure is always going to be appealing. And on top of that, he's been a better passer as the year has progressed. Now, there's still a lot that's kept me from having him as a clear top 2 pick contender or anything like that, but I do think he's got a projectable and workable game that someone should buy into. Trey Johnson saved some of his best for last in conference play, absolutely lighting teams up as a shot maker and shooter, and though he had a really off night against OU, I liked how well he figured out how to affect the game in spite of that, which has been a big question mark for him. Now, there's still some questions in how well he separates and creates looks at the bucket, but he's as dynamic as they get as a scorer, he's malleable, and someone that by all accounts loves basketball, and it'll be hard to turn that down in a lot of situations, even in an archetype that's historically a little volatile in the league.
Johnson wants it, now he has it with 28 points.
Kamal Malawach is going to get tested as much as anyone on this Duke roster in postseason play, and I'm curious to see how he responds. His NBA appeal is pretty clear, as you guys know at this point. 7'2", with great upside as a play finisher and the ability to take up a ton of space defensively and actually move around in pick and roll is what leads the way with him as a player. Down the stretch, being able to handle those post threats, stay out of foul trouble, getting over 25 minutes when it's needed, that'll be part of the key to their success, so I'm excited to see if he can handle it. Even with some of the questions on defense and in the shooting, I am a buyer of Derek Queen's skill set and think he belongs in the lottery. I think betting on a combination of ball skills, passing, and scoring versatility at 6'10" is usually going to end up being worth it. And he's also brought the effort a bit more consistently on defense, and he's probably a better mover than he gets credit. Still some longer term questions that'll always be there for him, even if he's an absolute star, and I think that's worth considering, but what he has shown is probably worth a risk in this class, and the tournament should be a great stage to showcase that. Now this class has some of the most interesting and unconventional prospects I've scouted, and Colin Murray-Boyles is certainly towards the top of that list, but I have gained a little more clarity on who I think he is at the next level. He's been excellent these last several weeks outside of the Tennessee game, and his abilities as a high impact defender who has improved a ton as a driver and self-creator and someone that can really pass it keep him a lottery level prospect. Now he won't make sense for every team offensively, and the shot is still a major question mark, but we'll tackle that and the rest of those details very soon, so stay tuned for that. A lot of the questions that have been there with Kasper Siakochonis have been at the forefront lately, and since February he's shooting just 41% from the field and 26% from deep, and at some point you gotta ask yourself how viable the path to being an NBA primary actually is for him, because the struggles to separate have been hard to ignore, especially against a team like Duke that has legitimate NBA bodies. I still buy his craft, his shot making and size being enough to find more than one way to contribute in the future, and making big shots when they count do matter, but I'm a bit more hesitant in him as a true top 5 option, but we'll see what happens. Kon Knueppel remains a really solid bet as a role-playing guard, as a high-level shooter who can make a play in the pick and roll and really competes defensively despite being at a disadvantage there. The athleticism is a limiter, and the fact that I believe he's closer to like 6'5" than 6'7" goes into this as well, so he's not someone I'd consider nearly as high as some others might, but I do know what he does, he's done it for a winner, and he should figure out how to contribute in some capacity. Asa Newell's combination of defensive versatility, play finishing, and an expanded confidence as a three-point shooter make him someone that's fairly easy to like. I understand some of the skepticism in him in terms of size and archetype, especially because he's never been much of a playmaker, but I see enough skills for a rotation big that makes plays on defense and has some of the best feel off the ball in this class. Jeremiah Fears was starting to create a ton of skepticism before riding the ship a little more against some good teams and showing what makes him special as an 18-year-old guard. He has the best handle in the class, he's got a dynamic ability to get paint touches and make plays, and though the rest can fluctuate from game to game still, he's one of the more appealing creation bets in the class. Now it may take some time to come together at the NBA level, but you watch him dismantle a team as good as Missouri, for example, and you've got to still be pretty intrigued by his upside. Jace Richardson has made me a much bigger believer in these recent stretch of games, going back to that first start against Oregon. He just has a gear with the ball in his hands and as a shot maker right now that very few other guards do. He's also good off the ball and knows where to be on the floor and is a very good athlete. Now where it gets tricky is he's like 6'2", he hasn't been a significant playmaker after creating advantages, and he's probably only okay defensively at his best, but I think there's a lot there to project as a contributor, and he's going to have an opportunity to steal the show in March in a very significant way.
Oh, Richardson went down, but he'll step up and...
Liam McNeely had a very interesting stretch of games since returning from that ankle injury, going for 38 against Creighton and making big plays in other games, but also showing some of his flaws as a defender and finisher in the process. I think he's a pretty solid role player bet, and if you believe he's an elite shooter, I wouldn't mind having him higher than this because he is fairly plug and play, but the individual defense and converting plays for himself continues to come up as a potential limiter for him. Noah Essengue is a prospect that's been difficult for me to gauge. I'm a fan of his movement skills at about 6'10". He's a versatile defensive piece who is significantly more active than other rangy Frenchmen like Ousmane Dieng and Tijan Salon. And then there's the production as an 18-year-old in a solid league, and that includes a recent game where he was one of the best players on the floor. Now, in saying all that, there is still some questions in his elite skills or what his role actually looks like at the NBA level. He's also shot just 44% from the floor in non-Euro Cup games, but in this class, I'm not sure you can pass up what he brings too many times. Rasheer Fleming has turned himself into one of the more intriguing two-way wing/forwards in this draft. His confidence and effectiveness as a shooter is at an all-time high as he's taken major jumps there, and that paired with his defensive versatility and athleticism at 6'9" makes him a pretty unique piece in this class. He's a mid-major guy who is still fairly limited with the ball in his hands, and he doesn't have great priors as a shooter before this year, so that is worth considering, but I'm a believer in the improvements that he's made and think he'll have quite a few fans on draft night. Thomas Sorber got injured against Butler and had to have season-ending surgery on his foot, and that'll make him one of the more interesting draft decisions to monitor. As long as that checks out as a likely short-term setback, I'm still in on him as a first-round pick and think he might have had some serious late lottery momentum. His defensive versatility, his skill set as a scorer on the interior, and the ability to operate as a ball mover are all very impressive, and I think he could at least be a rotation big despite being a bit undersized. Nolan Traore has had some better performances as of late, and that's been a great positive to see. My hang up with him is I still don't see the type of elite traits in his passing or in his athleticism or somewhere else to have as much confidence in him as I did with, say, Isaiah Collier through his struggles. But Traore's recent production, his priors, and budding abilities with the ball at least keep him a first round candidate, though a creator like him will likely have a wide range. Noah Pinda missed time in February with an ankle injury, but he's back, and I'm a buyer of his game as a versatile defender and connected piece on offense. The shot will be key for him really nailing home a role in the league, but he's improved there, and I just think wing-size players who can guard multiple positions, move the ball, and be a threat as a play finisher should always be coveted. Carter Bryant has continued to be an impactful piece for Arizona as a defensive wing / forward who can make a play and knock down a timely shot. I feel like if he was a little more convincing as a shooter and overall as an offensive player, he'd be in the lottery mix, so teams will be looking to project that further, and he could still be a candidate to stay there another year, but he's produced consistently and has obvious NBA role player tools to keep him comfortably in the first round. We've talked about this before, but historically there is a ceiling for players as old as Nick Clifford in this draft going in the first round, but I've been super impressed with him from start to finish this season. He took the feedback that he got in the combine last year and improved as a shooter and also as a ball handler and playmaker, and that matched with his wing defense, the athleticism, and the rebounding are the pieces of someone that has a great shot at being a contributor. Now, teams are still going to be interested in how different he looks in a workout setting this year, but he'll have a very good shot at getting a guaranteed deal, and for me, he's a first round lock. Ben Saroff is also part of this group of flawed but interesting creators. He's a nice passer, he's a capable scorer in a pick and roll, and has good craft overall, but he's an ineffective three-point shooter who's at his best with the ball and doesn't have those exceptional tools creating advantages, so there are questions. He's still worth a first round look to me, again, especially with the other lead guards in this mix. I haven't changed my mind much on Jaeger Dimon at this point. I do think he's shown signs of being a little more aggressive in certain games, and I still like him as a mover to go along with the passing, but he's far from a point guard to me. He shot just 21% from 3 against Power 5 comp, and at a certain point, what happens on the court over a big sample has to matter more than just perceived upside. I still think he's a solid swing pick as a playmaking wing because he's a shot away from being something significant, but he does still seem to have quite a few fans. There's not a ton of big wing freshmen that come around that have the upside Will Riley does as a shot maker and playmaker, and his re-emergence in the second half of the season earned him 6th Man of the Year in the Big Ten. He's going to take a minute to develop physically, and the consistency overall in defensive activity are real works in progress, but I think he has a chance at delivering top 20 value, whether that means he declares this year or takes another year in college. Another guy I haven't completely decided where to rank is LeBaron Philon. He's been back to what we saw pre-injury, playing in more 3-guard lineups, and his ability to make plays in the pick and roll, defend at the point of attack, and execute in the open floor have all been there in abundance. And most of all, it's been in winning fashion, and plays like picking the pocket of Taha Pettiford late in that game have stood out consistently. Questions about the shot, though he's been better there, and in the fact that he's not, I guess, special in any one area, do come up, but he's just one of those guys who wins and is just hard not to like at the end of the day. There aren't many players in the country who are more important to their team's success as Cam Jones is to Marquette, and I remain in on him as a potential first-round pick, even as an older guard. We always talk about being able to play multiple roles on the floor and be malleable depending on the setting, and we've already seen Cam go from one of the go-to scorers and shooters on his team to one of the best point guards and overall playmakers in the country. So with that and the other attributes that he brings to the game, I'm a fan of what he does and think he's got a great chance to contribute, and he's definitely capable of winning you a couple games in March. Until the last couple games, Miles Byrd has shot just 18% from 3 since late January and really tailed off as a scorer overall, which was pretty concerning for a guy who doesn't have the best track record or volume to fall on in that regard. Now, I still like his defensive activity, his athleticism, and passing ability as a connected piece enough to consider him in the late first, and mechanically the shot is more than viable, so there's some real long-term upside there. I would have just needed a little more improvement as a finisher and in his consistency on offense to be higher on him. I'm pretty interested to see where Danny Wolf lands because you just don't see guys his size with that combination of handle, passing, and shot making. But there are some real questions in the areas it matters for an NBA big in terms of rim protection, scheme versatility, and finishing at the rim. I usually do come back to what he does do well, and though I'd previously thought of Derek Queen as a guy who could replicate some of what Naz Reid does, it's probably Wolf that has a better chance of resembling that.
Wolf can get it going. Only 4 points today.
Adu Thero's knee injury made it tough for Arkansas's tournament chances, but he's had an otherwise great year as a team's leading scorer and a great slashing and defensive wing prospect. The shot will be key for him too, especially because he's not someone I trust as a decision maker at the NBA level, but I really like his tools and think he could go as high as the 20s. Hugo Gonzalez has continued to make a small contribution for Real Madrid, which is difficult in itself, but he did have a couple solid games for Spain in the Eurobasket qualifiers, showing off the slashing and some of his defensive playmaking. There's still going to be a lot of questions surrounding his shot and just how much he can be trusted with as a playmaker and with the ball in his hands, but I think that he could potentially rise. through the process. Duke's Isaiah Evans has had limited opportunity this year, but he's always taken advantage of the minutes that he does get and excelled even more as of late. He's got more to his game as a scorer, but he's been in a primarily movement shooter role, absolutely lighting it up at about 44% on nearly 20 attempts per 100 possessions. And the thing that's gotten him back on the board for me is the improvement that he's made defensively. Now, he still very well could be a 2-year guy, and I think that could end up being a great decision for him because he'll also need to develop physically, but he might be the X factor on this squad right now, and to me he's done enough to legitimately be considered as a pick in this draft. Ryan Kalkbrenner won his 4th straight Big East Defensive Player of the Year, and at a certain point his production and activity as a rim protector and drop big becomes fairly appealing, even as an older guy in some of the weaknesses that have been there for him. If you need a center in that late first, early second round range, he makes sense, and a couple games in March could convince the front office of that even more. Florida's Alex Condon has had a fantastic season on one of the title favorites and convinced me that he belongs as a top 40 prospect. At 6'11", he's good positionally on defense, he runs the floor extremely well, he rebounds, he's got good feel as a dribble handoff man, and he can step back and hit the occasional 3. I think there's a ton of pieces for a contributing big, and I've been impressed by how much he's grown as a sophomore, and if he has any other high stakes performances like the one he had against Bama on the road, he'll inevitably continue to rise. Janai Broome has had one of the most productive college careers I've watched fairly close, and he'll have a chance to stamp it all these next couple weeks. He's one of those guys who at a certain point is way too productive, skilled, and smart to not be considered highly, even as an older guy and someone who doesn't have the most appealing measurements for a big. So to me, late first round into the mid-second feels right. Boguya Markovic remains one of the more interesting upside plays as a 6'11" forward with a terrific skill set and intriguing movement abilities. He's had a good set of games recently too. He dropped 6 assists in his last outing, and though the questions about him defensively and physically keep him from being higher than this for me, I find him intriguing and he could pop at the Nike Hoop Summit as part of the world team coming up here soon. I'm still pretty in on Yaxel Lindeborg as an early second round type of guy. He's a versatile 4-man who's played a lot of 5 this year. He's active defensively, he can drive it, he can really pass in multiple situations, he's efficient, and though the shot isn't there yet, he is a career 77% from the line and at least up the volume. So definitely someone I think that a lot of teams will be interested in. I'm as curious to see where Boogie Flan ends up as pretty much anyone in this class. You guys probably know what he brings at this point as a quick guard shot maker who is a solid passer and a pest at the point of attack when engaged, but he is small, he was red flag bad at the rim, and the standards are just so high for those small guards in a way that he didn't really get to fully prove that he was of that before the thumb injury. I'm still a buyer of his skill set, otherwise he wouldn't be on here, but these next couple months of the process will be telling for him. Alex Karaban had a bit bumpier of a season than I would have anticipated. Now, it's probably not smart to get completely caught up into recency bias with him, but I do think this season highlighted his flaws in a way that having 4 NBA players a year around him might have covered up. Still though, he's been playing better as of late. He makes winning plays and his appeal as a complimentary wing is there. I just might not end up quite as high on him. Tahi Pettiford is one of those freshmen that's been sort of on the borderline of the board for me, but he makes his debut here. He's a big time shot maker who's shifty and skilled with the ball in his hands, and he plays with a ton of confidence as a shot maker. Now he's probably about 6'1", and that'll always be an uphill battle at the NBA level. He hasn't been great at the bucket, but he's got a great skill set and he's doing it on a very good team. I think he could be worth a long-term investment, and he could potentially wow teams with what will inevitably be some more big shots and big plays made here soon.
After the first one. That's a good call by you. Thank you. Pettiford.
Ian Jackson is one of the more talented scorers of all freshmen, but there's not much else to his game beyond that, and that's part of why his minutes have fluctuated these last several games. If he declares, he'll still have a fair amount of interest, especially with the track record that he has, but I still think there's a lot in his game that he can improve upon at the college level, whether that is back at UNC or in garnering major interest in the transfer portal. The opinions on Maxime Reynaud are actually quite a bit more split than I anticipated they'd be. I'm a fan of his offensive versatility as someone that can space it, attack a closeout, and score on the interior, but when we're talking about role player bigs, and we've talked about this in reference to some other guys too, I do want a little more defensively to feel great about him as like a true first rounder, but as a change of pace big and somebody whose offense I really do buy into, I still think he's worth valuing. Tyrese Proctor has a pretty easy case as a complimentary NBA guard, and he's been a huge part to Duke's success this year. He's been a knockdown shooter, a plus defender, and someone that can still make a play when needed, and we've seen him do a little more of that in the past. Now the big test for him in like the short term or just kind of exercising old demons is going to be showing up when it matters most, but he'll have a chance to change that narrative on him here soon and really carry that momentum likely into the league.
And get his ovation, the final ovation from this.
Alex Tui hasn't played since the last update, so there's not really much new to say for him. He's an off-ball wing who has expanded his game more to the three-point line. He can make a play for himself and is solid in help defensively. I still want to nail down a couple details on that end the next couple months watching more, but he should be a fine pick in the early second round range. Joan Behringer's tools is a 6'11 big who's an impressive athlete and has upside as a rim protector, and has done it against grown men is always going to create a legit draft case. I've been a little confused by his rise into the lottery because he is still very much a project, and the tools don't jump off the page in like a Rudy Gobert type of way, but I wouldn't be surprised if he landed in the first round. I could honestly see Dink Pate going either direction at this point. The couple games I watched recently, I still see an intriguing skill set for an 18-year-old wing who is a solid athlete, can score it and pass when given more of a leash, but even with some of the shooting improvements, he's questionable there. The decision making can fluctuate, and the defense more than anything has been more of a work in progress than I felt like it should be. But again, there are still enough tools there to buy into. JT Toppin was pretty ridiculous down the stretch in conference play, and it ultimately helped him win Big 12 Player of the Year. His energy and defensive versatility matched with his productivity around the bucket keep him a draftable prospect, and if he can continue to improve as a shooter as he's shown flashes of, he'll keep being harder to deny as an undersized big man. Walter Clayton Jr. has the potential to be the lead shot maker and playmaker on a Final Four team, and I think the steps that he has taken as a passer and decision maker this year land him comfortably in the draftable range. He also might be a first team All-American too, so I'm very excited to see his March run, especially because he delivered last year already. Dalen Swain has a ton to like as a 6'7 wing who defends, can dribble and make a play for others, and for him it's really just the shot that hasn't been there at all this year. He is a guy that it'll likely make more sense for him to spend another year in school because he is just 19 years old, but I think he'll get some real feedback here soon, and those guys that usually project as potential for future first rounders are always candidates to rise late in the process, and some teams view as someone they could get more value out of this year than potentially needing a first round pick to do that next year. RJ Lewis remains a legitimate draftable prospect and someone I think is still a bit underrated. He's been Big East Player of the Year level good for St. John's this year, and his defense on the wing, his athleticism, and ability to score it off the bounce make him intriguing. Now he'll need to keep working as a shooter, but I love the effort that he plays with, and I think that's one of the more undervalued skills. And putting up 28 and 11 against Marquette in an overtime W, those are the type of games that'll improve his stock down the stretch. Darion Williams had been banged up a bit recently, but he's continued to be a key piece for a really good Texas Tech team. He's a physical playmaking wing who can shoot the three, is solid positionally on defense, and though I think the athletic concerns may hinder him a bit on both ends, he does have a lot else to buy into. Sergio De La Reyna has been out with a dislocated shoulder since early February, but his skill set as a dribble pass shoot wing or a bigger guard has stood out plenty of times this year, and a lot more than in previous international competitions. I think he's an interesting long-term play and a potential stash guy, but one that at least has a chance of becoming a valuable piece in the future. Chaz Lanier is shooting about 42% on nearly 500 attempts from 3 in the last 2 seasons, and that combined with his ability to attack a closeout and some solid measurables keep him a draftable prospect. Now if he was a better defender, I'd probably have him quite a bit higher than this even as a 5th year guy, but nonetheless, that elite shooting skill will usually be worth an opportunity. I wish Jameer Watkins would have been in more of a position to win this year, but his defensive tools, his slashing, and secondary playmaking, as well as the marginal improvements he's made as a shooter, keep him at the least a potential 2-way guy for me. Despite being out for the season with a shoulder injury and not getting to show his talents against higher level comp, I still have quite a bit of confidence in Cedric Coward and think there's very few players like him in the second round. He's a wing with great length, he's a proven shooter who can put the ball on the floor and showed all of that before he went down, albeit with a couple of quieter games. I don't know about how much he'll be ready for the combine and workouts or anything like that, but he would be one of my dark horse candidates to rise if his body allows him that opportunity. I just think that his game makes sense at the NBA level. Bennett Sturts absolutely cleaned up the Missouri Valley Awards, and that's just a bow on what has been a super impressive season for a mid-major guy, let alone someone who was playing D2 the last 2 years. He can make plays, he's poised with the ball, he can shoot it, and as a bit better athlete than I think he's given credit. Teams are reasonably going to question the level of competition that he's played, and I would feel a ton more comfortable if he transferred to like Kansas State next year, but he has at least done enough to get noticed and could continue to rise if Drake can make it to that second weekend. I think Johan Grunlow could be a guy that rises a little more through the pre-draft process. His upside as a rim protector and floor spacer give him clear NBA appeal as a big man, especially as a young guy who's done it in a professional season, but for now he's in that second round mix of bigs. Houston's JoJo Tugler won a well-deserved Defensive Player of the Year in the Big 12. His length, activity, and versatility on that end is the reason he's a real prospect, even with the offense still being a work in progress and him being about 6'8". I'll be interested to see his decision because he is in such a good spot to develop at Houston, but I would consider him a draftable guy. This Duke team is super talented across the board, but it can't be overstated how critical Sion James has been to their success. He's been one of the most impactful transfers in the country as just a selfless guy who defends first, makes secondary plays, moves without the ball, and most importantly knocks down timely shots. I think you look at all that matched with the physicality that he has to belong and have to have him at least in the 2-way mix, even as a shorter wing. Josh Jefferson has some rougher scoring games lately, but his combination of defensive positioning and activity, his playmaking for a big, and overall versatility on offense is still fairly intriguing. He is a bit of a tweener, but if he can emphasize the shot going forward, I think he'll have a chance of contributing, a chance to showcase his talents on a team that's trying to get hot as they've gotten closer to full strength. Javon Small did about everything possible to keep this West Virginia team competitive through the injuries, and his skills off the dribble, his passing, his athleticism, and competitiveness on defense stood out consistently. I think he could gain some more fans down the stretch, and he's been one of my favorites to watch, so I think he's at least 2-way worthy even as an older and smaller guard. And here's a look back at the entire top 60. Now at this point of the year, I feel great about knowing everyone that'll be considered in this class. It's just going to come down to who actually declares, stays, transfers, all that good stuff that'll shape the rest of the board, along with a little March performance and the combine mixed in as well. We still got the freshmen down there in their own section. Some I would draft if they were to declare, but I think it probably will make more sense for them to return now, and there's also a few others in that similar realm that I didn't fit on there. But Drake Powell's defense on the wing continues to stand out in a major way. I thought Paul McNeil was really intriguing once he finally got minutes for NC State. We talked about Junie Mobley and Rob Wright as smaller guards, and then Mustafa Tiem. That's a long-term name to watch pretty closely. I've loved what he's done for UCF down the stretch as well. And then Flory Badunga we talked about before. And then there's several others on here that are basically in that same tier of guys that were in the top 60 at the end. From Micah Peavy at Georgetown, who has been excellent down the stretch. I think he's a real guy in terms of the defense and the improvements he's made as a shot maker. Xavier Lee's too talented offensively to not be in the second round mix. Michael Ruzic, Eric Dixon, Max Shulga. Obviously Mark Sears is going to have a lot to say in March, along with some of those other names on big time tourney teams as well. But that's how things look at the moment for me. I appreciate y'all for tuning into this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you are new to the channel, and leave a comment down below of some guys you think could boost their stock in a significant way over these next several weeks in March. Like I said before, the scouting reports are on the way, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, that's going to do it for this one. As always, I'm Keandre. This is HoopIntellect. Until next time, I'm out.